Hi, I'm Tom Stephenson, and welcome to Lecture 5A for Cost Control in Construction. Today we're going to be looking at measurement methods. In the last lecture, we kind of left off and we just sort of named the different measurement methods that you can use in cost control. One of the things that people don't really get is that there's different ways of measuring things, and each has its kind of advantages and disadvantages as far as being able to tell more closely or exactly where you're at on a project with regards to costs. And so the 6 methods that we'll go through are units completed, incremental milestones, start finished, cost ratio, experience opinion, and weighted or equivalent units. And so we won't spend too much time on this, but we'll go through them just so you have a good concept of the different ways. Well, units completed is pretty much what it sounds like. If it's something that you can measure by units, and there's a lot of ways of measuring units. You could measure units by blocks, by bricks, by square feet, by cubic meters, like concrete, like carpeting, flooring, roofing materials, etc. So that would be an example. And if we had a particular amount of square meters of carpet that's supposed to be laid, then we could measure how much has been laid, and then that would give us what amount or percentage we have completed of that. And then if we have a cost per unit, then we can multiply that number by that cost. So if the carpeting was supposed to be $100,000 and we put in, and it's supposed to be, let's say, 10,000 square meters, and we put in 5,000, then you'd know you put in 50% of it, and then you'd know you'd spent 50% of that cost, or at least that's how that would be calculated in that way. So it's something that's very helpful if it's something that's repeated. It's helpful for measuring productivity because you can also determine productivity rates. How many units are you doing for a set period of time, like a work hour, and so on and so forth. So that makes it a little bit easier to measure. So blocks is a lot easier. I thought I'd put that picture up of me. That's when I was 20 years old, and I'd bought a house, and I was putting a new front porch on the house, and so there's your units, your blocks. So I used to do brick, block, stone masonry, carpentry, and that's the labor. So you could actually measure how many units that you're installing in a particular time frame. That's my father-in-law. He always helped me with those kind of projects, so that was always fun working with him. So yeah, the units, so you can measure units this way, blocks. You could also measure it by surface area. So you could say square meters of block that's been installed. Usually something like blocks or bricks, it's just pretty easy to do it by units themselves. And then you get sort of used to, well, how many blocks should somebody be able to lay in a day, etc. So it gives you that idea. Lots of stories with this porch when I was 20, but anyways. This is it finished. It was a stone porch, so I put up over here stone veneer. You could measure that by the square meter. You know, that one actually, to be honest, you buy stone at the time you buy it by the ton. And because this is a natural stone, so you'd buy it by the ton. And each ton was supposed to be able to do so much square meters. You want to talk about a certain amount of waste. You know, when you're dealing with a natural stone, there's a fair amount of waste. As opposed to some of the manufactured stones that you see today, there's not that much waste with it, and it's a lot easier to install than a natural stone, although natural stone is really popular in custom homes. You see it everywhere in Toronto when a custom home is being built. More often than not, it's going to be made with a natural stone as opposed to a manufactured stone. Manufactured stones you see a lot in production homes there because it's, costs are everything, and so it's very tight. And then they would measure that based on typically square meters or square yards of installed work. So just some examples, and some I've got for cubic, right? So if it was earth, it would be cubic. And then you get into some of the trades like running conduits, running drain pipe and piping materials. Then you can get into linear feet too. So that could be measured in that respect, so that you actually can take your columns 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and this is equaling column number 4, actual quantity of work completed, divided by total quantity. So 2 divided by 8, that gives you your 25%, if you will, or 2,000 divided by 8,000, and so on and so forth. So that would give you some mechanism as to the percentage of work that's being completed, because you're trying to measure how much work is actually done. And this is a way that you can actually measure it pretty cleanly when you're talking about units. But sometimes units aren't always that easy to come by, that it's so measurable, especially in construction. Sometimes we have a lot of different tasks and they're all integrating with each other, and that can become a little bit tricky. So we can also use what they call the incremental milestones, or the steps method, it's also referred to. And that's where you can we've talked about work breakdown structures in previous classes, and you can break the work down into work packages and get detailed subtasks that need to be completed in a specific sequence, your critical path that we've been discussing. So this works well where there's not a lot of repetition and individual tasks are identified and budgeted. So that can work very, very well in things like forming and placing a foundation wall, laying the foundation wall and footings, erecting inside wall panels, brace settings. So you can have different amounts attached to those activities, and then you can, because you don't want them to be too large, you can have a very good sense of how much of that is completed. Of course, you could do it, a lot of projects where you got a lot of repetition on it might do it by cubic meters of concrete poured, and then that ties into all the forming and everything else that was brought about by it. Or the forming, going back to the units method, could be done by square feet installed. So there's different methodologies that can be used to determine that. But the incremental milestones is measuring those, breaking it down into a series of tasks, assigning amounts or costs to it, and then measuring each one. How much is this costing, and how much complete is this portion of the work, and for each subtask, so that you've got a really good detail on that particular item of work. Now, I just want to be clear, like the incremental milestone, so you're measuring amounts of work. Don't confuse, just because of the name, try not to confuse it with a milestone in a schedule, which is a point in time and doesn't reference any kind of work, right? So in scheduling, we call a milestone a point in time. An incremental milestone method is measuring individual subtasks or work packages that we've assigned costs to, and we've determined how much of that activity or work package is completed, so that we're looking at how much is that actually completed, and determining then what cost is appropriate for that. And some of that will also depend on how we've assigned the cost, if we're using like a scheduling program or something of that nature, because we have to think about, is it prorated, is it actual, or is it at the finish? So we've got to be kind of careful with how we've loaded on the schedules when we're using the incremental milestone method. Again, just looking at this percent complete, by the way, is actually looking at, so incremental milestones leading to percent complete. This is actually based on the durations. So you've got the duration of work, you've got the baseline duration of work, so that was the actual plan. You've got what's going on now when you've got completed tasks, like see this one is 5 days and that's 2 days, so the actual duration is 5 days, right? So it's actually looking at how long compared to the duration and the actual duration did it take. So the incremental milestones would be looking at the cost. Now, the cost would have stayed the same in your baseline. In your actuals, it would have gone way up. So that's the other thing. So it's 100% complete, but it's 100% complete with that new cost. So it would be at a higher level than your baseline. So then you get into the variance aspect. What's the variance on it? Start and finish. Well, we could be getting similar to how we talked about cash flow. You have at the start. Yeah, in scheduling software, you have the start, at the finish, and prorated. Well, start and finish just looks at start and finished. It doesn't consider prorated. So it's just weighting it. Are we going to pay 100% at the start and 0 at the finish? Are we going to pay 100% at the finish and 0 at the start, or somewhere in between? Is the start going to get 50%, 20%, and then the finish is going to get 80% or 50%? Depends on how we want to weight it on each end of that. And that could be predetermined with contract, how that intends to be paid out. Usually that's for payment purposes when we're thinking about start and finish and cash flow from that perspective. It's not really giving us the true of what we've incurred at that point. So there's differences between these different methods of measurement is what I want to point out, in how much value it gives you if you're trying to use it for replanning the work and trying to look at if you have a variance in your overall costs. So you'd have to be cognizant of that, and you'd have to make sure that what you're measuring is what you've applied to it, understanding how that would be structured, 50-50, 20-80, 0-100, or anything in between. The cost ratio method is based on a comparison of the actual cost or time expended to the budgeted planned cost or time. So if the concrete forming was budgeted to cost $20,000 and the cost incurred at a particular date was $10,000, then the estimated percent complete under the cost ratio method would be 50%. So it's actual cost to date divided by estimate at completion. All right, so estimate at completion. Then when we think about estimate at completion, we'll talk about this when we get into earned value a little bit. Estimate at completion could be higher than what your budget was, because now you're in the project. Maybe you've determined something now is going to cost more as a result of that. So how are we comparing to the estimate so we've got our actual cost to date divided by our estimate at completion. That's giving us the percent that we've actually completed it. If it's actual cost to date and we compare it to our budget cost, so let's say this example here, $10,000 divided by 20,000 equals 50%. Well, what if estimate at completion was now $30,000 instead of $20,000, because you're not that far along as far as doing the actual work. Yes, you've spent $10,000, but you still have another $20,000 to go, because you're not going that fast. You're not going the way that you expected to go. So in a case like that, then that $10,000 is going to be divided by your actual cost to date, is going to be divided by a new number, not your budgeted number, your estimate at completion, which would be 30,000. Now you're only 33% complete. So you see the difference there? It's a substantial difference. So this is, in this case, looking at the change that you have in your cost, and now what percent of that change have you've got that completed. So it's assuming that you've got 10,000 of it done, that the other amount, which would be your 66.666%, that would be left, would be now much more money, because it's $30,000. So as far as complete, it's 1/3. So it's a little bit different when you think about the estimate at completion. So it's helpful for that way, and it can give you sort of a quicker high-level amount, how these things are adding up for you, because how much have you spent, and now how much over budget are we now, right? Like that, not just how much we're over budget, like the variance, but now what's the new budget showing up at on our project? That's what's important to understand too. So in this case here, we've got estimate at completion. So what I did here, I upped this particular number and then the budget, and we've got 5 divided by 4, actual cost to date, 250,000. So if I did this right, which I'm pretty sure I did, 250,000 divided by 1,200,000 gives us 20.83%, as opposed to 250,000 divided by 1 million, right? So if we were still on track for completion, like these ones seem to be, then that's fine. Then they're just going to follow the same as if it was this. But if we're over budget on one of these line items, then that's going to change our percentage. And so that's giving you a much more reasonable approach to measuring what costs you've incurred as per what the overall project looks like it's going to cost now at completion. It doesn't mean that has to happen. Maybe there's things that you can do with opportunities that you see in the schedule to get that back. But at this point, that's what you've done percentage-wise of what your finished project is trending to be. On the experience option, so this is where you kind of look at it if you're experienced and you just say how much you've done. So you look at it and you use your experience. To be honest, quantity surveyor probably wouldn't agree with me on this, but on certain items, you don't have units to measure, you don't have cubic meters, square meters, that sort of thing. It's a little bit harder to quantify. And those cases, you tend to use the experience option. Now, if you've broken the activities down to smaller amounts, then it's going to tend to be more accurate, because you're only going to have so much that isn't finished. When things are finished, it's finished. So you had that cost and you had that, or you have whatever the costs were for that, and you can attach that to it and then compare that to the budget amount. So that's okay, but it's more for the things that are, this is a third finished, this is a half finished, or is this 75% finished? And then part of the issue is, if you're using the experience option, are you an optimist or a pessimist? How are you, reviewing that with your experience? So there's a little bit more latitude or subjectivity is the word I'm looking for. Whereas units, fairly objective. But even units, I'm just going to go back here for a minute because I was just thinking on this. I meant to say it. Even units, if I go back to this, me laying the blocks on this porch here and the stonework. Well, you know what? Let's say it's just a small veranda, okay? So just a small porch. But if you know anything about masonry work, doing the columns is a lot more work than doing more of the straight walls, right? So you could say the same thing with a gymnasium wall. You're doing a nice, long, straight gymnasium wall, you can really motor putting those units in. If you've got if you motored with the units in the gymnasium, that might look great. But then if you've got all these little washrooms and angles and corners everywhere and small little walls with doorways and all these other things, there's no way that you're going to be laying those blocks as fast as you would in one long, straight, ginormous wall. So even units, you have to do some factoring in there to if there's a lot of dichotomies when you're trying to do that measurement. So that does require some injection of experience in there. It's not always the same laying a unit, a block, or a cubic meter of concrete, because it kind of depends how are we putting it and how complex is the pour or the formwork that we had to put up to support it, right? So there might be, most of the project might be fairly straightforward, and then there's a section that is not. So you have to have a little bit of variation in how you're interpreting that information. So I'm trying to get you thinking everything's not as exactly clean cut as you might think. And that's why there's these different methods for reviewing and looking and measuring the actual work that is being performed. and that's helpful that way. So that's the experience option and where that tends to come in. All right. There's also the weighted method example. And the weighted method example, you have your schedule of values. We haven't gotten into this too much, but we will. The schedule of values is your breakdown of the project prices. This should be done at the, just after the award stage, because what you're doing is you're getting the schedule of values set, and this is going to tie to your payment schedule. And so if you have 10% in concrete floors and roof, then that means that 10% of this price, which would be $1 million, that's in the budget for that. Now, if you're saying that you're 50% complete that, then that would mean that you should get of that $1 million, 500,000. So it's tying very strongly to your payment schedule. So then the weighting is based on the breakdown from a percentage of your schedule of values, right? And so the weighting is 2 to 4, right? That amount, that percentage based on that gives you the percent of the overall project. And then you can actually see by the amount of activities that are done and what these percentages are, how much percent complete this overall project is, right? So you can get the numbers that way. So it gives you the weighted percentage of completion for the project based on the breakdown of the schedule of value. So that's really being the driver. And in a lot of cases, that's what you're trying to substantiate with your billings is more progress payments. This is 100% complete, and so that should factor into these numbers, and this should be then what we're getting paid off of this total amount. And then again, it depends how you've negotiated, so there'll probably be a holdback amount for lien legislation, etc., but that's the process. So really, there's those 6 methods, and you can see how they work for you. At the end of the day, we really want to be able to understand at any point in time what we had budgeted for something and what we're spending and what the difference is. Are we under budget? Are we over budget at this time? The sooner you have that information, as we mentioned in the last lecture, the quicker we can act upon it. We can look at this as a methodology for developing a recovery. And we talked about the direct method in the last lecture. Remember, detect along the critical path. Look more immediate than towards the end of the project. You want to fix it now. Think, I want to fix it now. Reduce. Look for opportunities to make cost savings, and you should always be doing that. That's lean thinking, which is to reduce or eliminate waste. And so in other words, you're looking for the no or low cost solution. That's the R in direct. E, experiment, try different things, look at it, review it, sensitivity analysis. C, get the commitment of the people involved. And T, that's going to be building confidence in the team and getting you back on track. So that's what I wanted to go over, these 6 sort of different methodologies, and they can be used in different ways for different purposes and different reasons. But the main point is you want to find a way so that you can reasonably accurately know how much money is being spent at points in time as you're progressing in the project, and so that you can take action right away, not sort of in the cost reporting aspect where the project's done, how much did we make, how much did we lose? No, as the project's proceeding. So that's today's lecture, and we'll be back with lecture 5B, which is going to be introducing some lean concepts to the course, which I'm looking forward to. This is Tom Stephenson wishing you a wonderful day, and we'll see you soon. Bye for now.